This is a very special episode of America's Got Talent. I'm your host, Nick Cannon. No, my name is James Hill. I am Director of Communications at Nonprofit Vote, and you are here with our very first, what we're calling webinar follow-up. It's a new Facebook Live series that we have going. It's the first episode. We're still working out names, but the main point is to highlight some really crucial information that we've gotten from some of our past webinars. Update that information based off of the news, take some questions if you have them, and give you some more information. So I want to introduce I guess we're co-host Caitlin. I'm not exactly sure who we are, but Caitlin Donnelly here, who is our program director, and we're really gonna kick it off there. So Caitlin, how you feeling?
I'm good, James. I'm excited for us to try this out, and I hope that we can give folks some good updates and refresh of webinars from the archives, or ones that we've done that I know folks have a lot of questions about.
Great. So the one we're going to kick it off with was our redistricting webinar from earlier this year, which I think was obviously, all of our webinars are successful. It was one of our more successful ones. Do you want to give us sort of a breakdown of how that went, and sort of how that went and how it's sort of relevant now in December?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we did that webinar back in February, and at that time, redistricting and thinking about that process was starting to be in the news. A lot of groups and nonprofits started thinking of it, especially if they had been working on census work. So in 2020, it's hard to go back and remember, because I think we're all still in the collective sort of trauma of lockdown and how many things drastically changed and still aren't the same. But there was the decennial census. It was the first online census, and there were a lot of nonprofits and individuals really working to make sure everyone got counted, even though we had lockdowns and things that really disrupted our normal census operations. So part of that was that there was a delay in the data coming out. So when we had Justin Levitt, a professor from Loyola University, who runs the redistricting website that I use whenever I want updates, we didn't have the census block data yet. So, just in case anyone isn't really familiar with the census, it's held once every 10 years, and it's the way our government counts every person that lives in the US. So citizens of foreign countries living here, newborn babies, people who are houseless or living in prisons or other group facilities, military members stationed abroad, Native people living on tribal land, just basically every single person that is either living in US or, because they intend to return so soon because they're out on military business, all counted. And we do it so that we can make sure that we know how many people are in our country, and use that data to decide everything from how we spend federal funding to who our elected officials are. So the highest profile thing, I think, is redistricting. And most of our state legislators, all of our US House of Representatives, many local legislators are elected from districts. Those district lines change every 10 years. Sometimes they won't change at all, but they are up for review every 10 years because since the founding of our country to today, it hasn't been a straight line across every place in this country in terms of population growth. It's really varied. And so this was what the founding fathers came up with to try to keep things fair over time. So we really needed the most recent count, because the last time redistricting happened was in 2011 with the results of the 2010 census. And if you heard about the census results coming out, you might have heard that one big finding was that it was a huge jump in people reporting that they were biracial or multiracial. And that, this country is really changing demographic wise. We also learned that some states really gained a lot of population and some states were losing some. So we've switched around some House seats. California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. So a lot of states that are either seen as very politically significant, either because, and many of these have a lot of, those seats and which represent electoral votes, they all lost a seat. And then in Michigan, that means 13 districts instead of 14 districts. But Colorado, Florida, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon all gained 1 seat, and Texas gained 2 seats. So that means their new map will have 38 districts, and that's 38 electoral votes up for grabs in presidential elections, but also those 38 House of Representatives. So that's the biggest update since our webinar, is that we've, learned what those changes are in terms of the House seats.
Great, Caitlin, thank you. I want to just make sure that I'm clear here that anybody watching can ask us questions, so you can leave comments or or any other way we can get to them, and we can answer them live right here. But next up, Caitlin, any other updates? I know you mentioned that was the big one. Are there any other redistricting updates that we should be aware of, or that nonprofits maybe watching this should be aware of?
Yeah, so actually a lot of the map drawing has already happened. As of November 30th, so a couple of weeks ago, 20 states have adopted new congressional maps, and 22 states have passed state legislative district maps. So I'm in Massachusetts, where the legislator sent the maps to our governor to approve a few weeks ago. James, you live in Maryland, and I'm pretty sure that you can leave comments about the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission's proposed maps. So you should be able to find the website for that, and you could actually weigh in on the maps in your state.
Got it. Oh, that's good to know. That's good information. Now, I've heard a lot about gerrymandering. That's been in the news a lot lately. Is that something we should be worried about? Nonprofits, individuals? How does that work?
So gerrymandering is when a map is drawn so that the districts will favor generally one party over another, giving them a competitive advantage. It's done in 2 ways, either packing voters that would vote similarly into one district or a few districts, so that across the whole state they have kind of limited political power, or just cracking those voters apart so they can't even elect someone that reflects their views and backgrounds where they live. So either political party can do this, and we've seen a move in lots of states to create independent commissions to draw the maps and conduct redistricting, so that elected officials aren't manipulating the maps to benefit themselves. And it is something we definitely want to prevent, gerrymandering. And if you remember our America Goes to the Polls report, which was released around the same time or shortly after we did this webinar, we saw that certain voting policies really correlated with higher voter turnout. And, so policy is a big factor at play, but also competition. And the places where elections were seen as competitive, they had higher turnout because voters really felt like their vote would matter. And I think the biggest thing is that gerrymandering really fuels the idea that the system is rigged, and that politicians don't care about voters, and that a single person's vote doesn't matter. And you know, like that skepticism is something that is often cited for why people, you know, may not turn out to vote. So I think it's important that nonprofits are, you know, aware of what's happening with redistricting, and when possible, really advocating for the fairest maps so that the folks they serve are going to feel like they are represented and their voices can be heard.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things about the maps that sort of, as you said, like fuels like the system feeling like it's rigged, is that the gerrymander maps look crazy, right? They're in these weird, funny, uneven shapes. What how should people react to these maps when they're looking at them, and once they've been approved, like how should people react to them, because they do look funny. They don't look like a natural map that we are used to.
Yeah. Now you can't judge a map by its shape. Maps that are fair. Okay, hold on. I want to just make sure we're really clear on what fair means. Fair doesn't necessarily mean 50-50 or an equal number of Democrats and Republicans in the state House and House of Representatives. A fair map means that it's reflecting the actual statewide proportion of voter preferences. So if there were a state where, let's say, 70% of voters were libertarian, then you'd want to draw districts so that about 70% of the seats in the state house would likely go libertarian, not like really low, like 40, that isn't reflecting the will of the voters, or 90, that's really disenfranchising those, that 30% minority. So you're trying to draw it so that it reflects the statewide proportion. But you're also trying to, in addition to making sure that they're all just relatively equal in terms of number of people residing there, you're trying to preserve communities of interest. And so that's like communities defined by geographic features, or they have a historical cohesiveness. And sometimes preserving those, or, just trying to get to the, equal people per district, you can end up with really funny looking maps that are actually very fair. So don't judge a book by its cover. You might see bizarre shapes, but that alone isn't cause for alarm.
So I hear what you're saying, and that's good to know. But I think people are, we're visual creatures or whatever. We're going to look at things, but if we can't tell by looking, how do we tell what's fair?
Right. So technology is our friend here. So, back when you were, young, they would have had to use pencils and paper. But
Is that an age dig at me, Caitlin?
Just a little. But
got it. That's right.
These days now, we all have computers and we have really powerful algorithms that can actually design these maps really quickly. And so that means that we can spend less time drawing maps and more time fighting over them. But we also really generally have a higher degree of certainty around the consequences of these map lines. Luckily, the people have that power too, and there's a lot of sites that people can visit. So Dave's redistricting.org is an original, an OG as it were, and it analyzes maps. News outlet 538 has a redistricting tracker. I think my favorite is planscore.org. It's run by Campaign Legal Center, and I'm a big fan of theirs. But also, it's just really easy to use if you're not already enmeshed in the world of redistricting lingo and just like a mappy person. But before you hit the trackers, I recommend you go to redistricting.lls.edu. That's Justin Levitt's website. You can go and click on your state. And so you'll get an overview of how the process works in your state. And you'll know, like, at the latest updates, like whether public comment period is open. So check that out and then go to one of the redistricting trackers. And even if you just Google that, a couple options will come up and you can see how the different proposed maps stack up against each other, both like where the lines are drawn, but also is it going to provide a partisan advantage in one way or another.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to turn my hearing aid back up. I didn't hear anything you just said. So All right. No, this is great information, Kenny. Thank you so much. We're gonna move over to some questions, and we have one question. I think you may know these people. They're called, yes, National Voter Registration Day. They said, longtime listener, first time caller, quick question. Does being put into a new congressional district impact my voter registration at all? Also, love the lumberjane chic look.
Oh, thank you, National Voter Registration Day. And that is a good question. So, if you move, you need to update your registration. But if the districts move on you, you're all set. Your voter registration will stay active even if the districts that you end up in are changed. But you should, it never hurts to just check into your registration status and make sure it's up to date.
Great. Got two more questions and then we'll wrap this up. The first one is, what are the steps advocates need to take to start the process to get an independent citizen commission? To get an independent citizen commission to draw lines.
Okay, yeah. So it's going to depend on your state. So in Michigan, which is sort of like a, darling story of getting an independent citizen commission. I think there's a Netflix documentary about what happened there. And, it started out as concerned citizens talking on Facebook, and they eventually organized into a C4 group called Voters Not Politicians. And they continue to work on voting rights and access in Michigan after they successfully got a ballot question on the ballot for voters to determine for themselves. So they had to get the question onto the ballot and then, make their case directly to voters. So depending on the Constitution and rules and laws in your state, the best route might be a ballot measure or constitutional amendment, or it could be going through the legislature and just trying to pass it among elected officials. But don't reinvent the wheel. There are so many groups on the ground working on this. There's been a lot more attention paid to redistricting and getting independent citizen commissions. So start looking locally for groups already doing that work. Maybe try your state's chapter of Common Cause. So yeah, it'll really depend on where you are, but just make sure you have good partners along the way to support you.
Cool. Okay, so Kayla, I'm going to ask one more question, and then in the wrap up, let's talk about what people can expect and what next steps they can take. So the last question is, some of the minority communities believe that they'd rather not be packed into a couple of sure win districts that result in a majority of other districts being completely uninterested in addressing the needs of the minority community because they have no voice in these districts. How do you thread the needle?
So that's a great question. And I think that's really why we want to involve as many people as possible in redistricting processes and make sure that all their voices are heard. It's important to preserve communities of interest and important to listen to voters and residents of a community. I think that using the mapping platforms that I referenced earlier can help people visualize and really understand some of the potential trade-offs that would arise with various maps. So that's really an interesting, cool thing to play with and can really spark dialogue. And, ideally get as many folks involved in the process, whether they're making public comments, writing to legislators, getting their neighbors involved. Your question said some, because no minority group is a monolith. So it's really important to be having the discussions about these impacts and what communities want to see for themselves.
Got it. Okay. Well, listen, Caitlin, thank you. I think this was, I had a lot of fun. This is our first time. Let's let the audience know sort of what's coming. Can you tell us a little bit about 2022 and what people can expect from webinars?
Sure. Of course, we'll have some of our longtime faves like staying nonpartisan. I want to do some webinars on working with candidates, especially like how can we get candidates to say yes to participating in our candidate surveys and candidate forums and events. We are looking for speakers that have tried creative things in their communities and had success around voter registration, voter education, or anything else related to civic engagement. And I think we'll definitely be talking a little bit more about redistricting, and once all the maps are finalized, the impacts that's going to have on our nonprofits who are engaging voters, as well as the legal changes and how voting restrictions or expanded access in different states is going to play into these elections, and what nonprofits can do, in light of those laws to really make sure people are still able to participate.
Great, great. And as always, if you want to stay updated on what we're doing with webinars and the latest in nonpartisan voter engagement resources, you can go to nonprofitvote.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which we send out, I think an appropriate amount of times in a month, so we're not clogging up your inbox, but you're staying up to date. We'll probably drop that link in the comments. But yeah, so we're going to wrap this up. The question I think everybody has on mind is like, when are we going to do this again? Our main idea is to do this in between our big webinars. So we'll be talking about what we did in a previous webinar, talking about what we might be doing in a future webinar. Think of us like the Talking Dead, except with no celebrities and no zombies and no blood. So we're somewhere in that range. But we'll be seeing you again in early 2022. And yeah, anything else, Caitlin, before we sign off?
I just hope people are ready for a very busy year of primaries and midterms,
Yes,
but
indeed.
rest until then.
All right, everybody stay registered. Talk to you later.